We're going to complete the next step in the ring making process, and in order to do that I need to anneal the ring. After placing the texture in there, that work hardened the ring, so we have to anneal it in order to get it more malleable so that we can form it around the ring mandrel. I'm going to now quench it in some water and pickle it, and then I'll show you how to form it. I have now removed the ring from the pickle, and we're going to form it around a ring mandrel. The ring mandrel here is placed into a slot in a bench so that I'm able to hold it firmly and tap the ring around it. What I do is I pinch it in between my index finger and thumb, about halfway on the ring, and then I butt my index finger up against the mandrel. And I'm going to take a rawhide mallet and I'm going to tap this over, creating a hook. Once I've created the hook, I then grab it by the hook with my index finger and thumb, set it down on the mandrel, tap it around again, creating a C. At this point, I take my fingers and I squeeze that C together, like that. Once I have that squeezed together, I now need to get this seam to be perfectly in line with itself. So I'm going to slide it onto the mandrel. I'm going to squeeze it together, and I'm going to tap firmly down on the seam. Now at this point, it'll look like this, and you can see that now the seam is running to itself nicely. It's not quite parallel yet, so I'll just manipulate that a little bit with my hands, and now the seam is ready to equal file, and I will show you how to equal file. We're now going to file the seam. It's called equal filing. We're going to file both of the edges, the short edges here on the seam, at the same time, equally, so that when we push it together like this, when we look up at the light, there will be no light shining through the seam. So the idea is to get this edge, this seam, to fit perfectly together with no light shining through. In order to do that, we are going to use an equal file. An equal file, or flat file, is flat on both sides and typically has a flat end to it. This way we can pass this file through the seam and file both ends equally at the same time so that they fit together perfectly. So I'm going to brace this, put my thumb in the inside of the ring, brace it up against a table. I'm going to take the equal file. I have that braced in my palm. I'm holding it like this in between my index finger and thumb, using my other fingers to support it. My index finger is on the top of the file. I'm going to then set that in the inside of the seam, and I'm going to push down on the top lightly so that both sides will touch at the same time, and I'm going to file through it and along the edge. You can see how I'm filing into the edge and along the edge like this at the same time. So I'm slowing that down a little bit. Sometimes it gets bound up. That just means that you're pushing down on the top just a little too much. I file this, I'm going to be looking at it. Most times it doesn't take a long time to do if you've done it properly. And now I'm going to push that together and make sure that it's touching all the way along the edge. You can see I don't have any gaps. The best way to look at that would be up through the inside of the seam, up at a light source. And if you see any light shining through, then you know that it's not filed completely. At this point, I can see that it is filed completely. I looked up at the light. I don't see any light shining through. Now I need to spring load it. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually push this past it like that. I want this seam to stay together by itself. So metal has a memory. So at this point, it's nice and parallel, they look good, but when I push it together and then I stop putting pressure on it, it springs apart and there is a gap there. I cannot have any gap when I solder. There cannot be a gap there. So what I need to do is take the ring and push it back and forth on top of itself, back and forth like this. And what I'm doing is I'm actually hardening it so that when I pull it open lightly, I don't pull too hard, I pull it open just a little bit, it should stay together now on its own. Now I'm going to make sure that these edges are lined up. So I want to make sure that I line those edges up and it is together as tight as I can get it. Make sure that those lines are lined up. Those edges, I mean, are lined up. And now it looks like it's ready to solder. There's a little bit of a gap there. I'm going to push that together a little bit more. And you just work that back and forth till it is stuck together and everything is lined up. Now it's ready to solder. Now that's a nice tight seam and we'll be ready to solder that together.